Hey, folks. This is Jesse Cope, back with another episode of the American Soul Podcast. Hope y'all are doing well, wherever y'all are and whatever part of the day you're in. Sure to appreciate y'all joining me, giving me a little bit of your time and effort, a little piece of your day. I will try and use it wisely. Hopefully it gives us some extra tools for our toolbox, as we used to say in the Marine Corps, and hopefully it helps our country, even if just a little bit, turn back to God and Jesus Christ. Hope y'all had a good Thanksgiving. Hope that you survived parades and football games and food and family, and hopefully managed to remember God and our nation even just a little bit. We're going to get into the Christmas proclamations pretty quickly. We're going to do one more podcast on some of the inaugural addresses of some of our presidents. And then we're going to switch over to some of the Christmas messages that we do each year, which I'm pretty excited about. So I'm looking forward to that. I always look forward to that. Yeah, I think that's it. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for you, Father, and your Son, Jesus Christ, and your Holy Spirit. Thank you for the time to record this podcast and the people that listen to it and share it. Please be with their families. Guide us, Lord. Surround us with your angels. Protect us from evil. Guide our steps. Be with those who are hurting, whether it's suffering physically or emotionally. Be with the families who are struggling, the marriages that are struggling. Heal those marriages. Heal whatever rifts are in those families. Father, help us to look to you, to trust in you in all things, even when we don't understand what's going on. Give us perseverance and patience, strong faith. Be with our leaders. Help us to elect men who rule in fear of you. Help our leaders to turn to you for guidance and wisdom, from the president, vice president on down, senators, admirals, generals, representatives, governors, mayors. And guide my words here, Father, please. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. Have you made time for God today? Have you put him somewhere in your day as your top priority so that your day is planned around him? Or is he just something you kind of shove in on the edges? And your spouse, do they know that they are your second priority each day? I was talking to somebody extremely dear to me recently, and we were talking about the amount of time and energy we put into other things. And they had the insight to make the comment that in their experience, when we start to put time and energy into other things, it's often because we are doing something we know we shouldn't be. I mean, sometimes it's really devious, but even if it's just avoiding an issue that we know we ought to be dealing with in our marriage, and it's really true in our faith too, folks, in our personal relationship with God. But anytime we start to put a ton of energy into something that shouldn't be a priority above our faith or above our marriage, there's a pretty good chance that we're doing it, at least subconsciously, because we know we're doing something we shouldn't be, or we're not doing something that we should be. That's not always the case, I'm sure, but I certainly agreed with their assessment. If we have time to pour into TV and our phones and sports, but we don't have time to pour into our relationship with God and our relationship with our spouse, I mean, at bare minimum, we just have our priorities out of order. Worst case, it's because we're doing something else that we shouldn't be doing. And we don't want to have to interact with that person, whether it's God or our spouse, and give them the opportunity to see that. All right. Let's see. Where are we going to start? John Quincy Adams, inaugural address, Friday, March the 4th, 1825. This was his opening paragraph. I didn't post these today, folks. I didn't read through these. I'm still kind of trying to figure out how this is going to work. I would like a way to post these so that you could come and read through them on your own if you wanted to, or use them for homeschool or even in your classroom, public school, private school. I just haven't quite figured out how to do it yet. Reading through each one of these inaugural addresses today would probably have taken a couple hours. But we'll see. I'm still working on it, but that's why I didn't post these today. Again, Friday, March 4th, 1825. This is the inaugural address of John Quincy Adams. This is his opening paragraph. In compliance with a usage coeval with the existence of our federal Constitution, and sanctioned by the example of my predecessors in the career upon which I am about to enter, I appear, my fellow citizens, in your presence and in that of heaven, to bind myself by the solemnities of religious obligation to the faithful performance of the duties allotted me in the station to which I have been called. And then at the close, same inaugural address, to the guidance of the legislative councils, to the assistance of the executive and subordinate departments, to the friendly cooperation of the respective state governments, to the candid and liberal support of the people so far as it may be deserved by honest industry and zeal, I shall look for whatever success may attend my public service, and knowing that, except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain, with fervent supplications to his favor, to his overruling providence, I commit with humble but fearless confidence my own fate and the future destinies of my country. I think that first part we often forget. We've talked about it on the podcast when I've had the opportunity, the privilege to speak to younger people throughout the years. I often try and remind them, but folks, somebody's always watching, even if it's quote unquote just God, right? That's the one we ought to be the most concerned about to begin with. But a lot of times in our human state, we're able to kind of ignore that because there's nobody really watching what we're doing, right? There's no human being seeing us pick up this candy bar off the shelf and walk out the store with it or whatever else, from little to big, much worse. There's nobody really looking at us when we're watching this on TV or on our phone or on our computer. There's nobody beside me that's really seeing what I'm typing about this person or sitting at this bar with me watching what I'm doing. But there's always somebody, folks. God most of all. So I think that was interesting that he said in your presence, right, fellow citizens, but also in that of heaven. It's kind of a reminder, folks, for those of us who are married, of the vows that we took. You made that promise before a bunch of people. We seem to be able to overlook that today with no-fault divorce. We just kind of pretend that it's just one big party and it doesn't really mean anything. But theoretically, we gave those vows. We acknowledged even that we gave those vows in front of God as well. So, and then the quote, I think from Psalms, except that the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh, but in vain. Um, that particular Bible verse has been used a couple times that I can remember uh, by leaders throughout the history of our nation. I'm trying to look up that Bible verse real quick and see. Yeah. Psalm 127 verse 1, unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman keeps awake in vain. This is really, I saw this yesterday, a post online by a national figure. And they made the comment that we voted our way out of this. Folks, we hadn't voted our way out of anything yet. We're just getting started. And a huge part of the problem, the biggest part of the problem, honestly, even worse than what the left is openly, because they're openly trying to dismantle and have been for decades, for the last century, trying to dismantle America. That's the enemy you know, right? But we have a lot of people who consider themselves conservatives and patriots who claim to love the country, who want to completely separate God and state. This last election at best was a minor battle. It wasn't the war. It wasn't even remotely. I've said this before. If you want to make a comparison to World War II, this was not Midway. This certainly was not the atomic bombs at the end. This wasn't even one of the victories in the island hopping campaign. This was a lot more like the Doolittle raid. We've seen no real constructive fundamental change yet, folks. And it's going to be, if you think that the left is going to go quietly into the night, I'm afraid you're sadly mistaken, and you're going to be in for a really rude awakening. Thomas Jefferson's second inaugural address, March 4th, 1805. I like this one just simply because of how often the left tries to claim that Jefferson was a complete deist, and also that our nation was just deist in general, that we weren't a Christian nation. This is at the very end of his inaugural address. I shall need, too, the favor of that being in whose hands we are, who led our forefathers as Israel of old from their native land, and planted them in a country flowing with all the necessaries and comforts of life, who has covered our infancy with his providence, and our riper years with his wisdom and power, and to whose goodness I ask you to join with me in supplications, that he will so enlighten the minds of your servants, guide their counsels, and prosper their measures, that whatsoever they do shall result in your good, and shall secure to you the peace, friendship, and approbation of all nations. So a couple things, right? You see he's referencing Israel of old. And if you know anything about Jefferson and the original Steel Design that I believe he and Benjamin Franklin and John Adams came up with, they referenced the Israelites fleeing from Pharaoh out of Egypt, because a lot of our founding generation felt that way about fleeing out from under the slavery, the tyranny of the British. And so they used that. We didn't end up using that seal design that they had, but that was a pretty common analogy. And Jefferson used it again, right? And then here he's talking about Israel. So, he's talking about the Christian faith. He's not talking about Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism or Mother Natureism or Satanism or anything else. And then you notice that he asked for all of the citizens to join with him in supplications to God, that he would enlighten the minds of those who serve in public service and guide their counsel and prosper their measures in whatever they do. Why would you have a man ask for God, the Father of Jesus Christ, to guide their public counsels in an official capacity if they wanted separation of God and state? Which is totally different than separation of church and state. And separation of church and state is the phrase that they used in 1947, the Supreme Court did in Everson versus Board of Education, but that's not what they meant. They just used it as a cover. They completely twisted that meaning of that phrase. What they really were after and what they've gotten to a large degree is separation of God and state, which is nothing at all that our founders wanted. James Madison, inaugural address, March 4th, 1809. This is from the end of his inaugural address. But the source to which I look for the aids which alone can supply my deficiencies is in the well-trained intelligence and virtue of my fellow citizens, and in the counsels of those representing them, and the other departments associated with the care of the national interests. In these my confidence will, under every difficulty, be best placed next to that which we have all been encouraged to feel, in the guardianship and guidance of that Almighty Being, whose power regulates the destiny of nations, whose blessings have been so conspicuously dispensed on this rising republic, and to whom we are bound to address our devout gratitude for the past, as well as our fervent supplications and best hopes for the future. Our best hope, folks, for the future. Our best hope is in God. That's our only real hope, is God and Jesus Christ for the future of our nation. If you take Christ, if you take God out, then we just turn into any number of different countries throughout the history of the world. You hear people so often talk about the Second Amendment and how great it is. And it's a great amendment. It's a necessary amendment. The ability to arm ourselves as citizens and defend against the exact kind of government that the left has been trying to institute for quite a while. The problem is, if you don't have a people, a moral and virtuous people, it doesn't matter. Then you've just got a lot of armed people who are going to do whatever they feel like doing on any given day. And that's not going to turn out very well, as I'm sure most of y'all can figure out. And just again, folks, especially this time of year, but really just all throughout the year, our devout gratitude for the past, for all the blessings that he's bestowed upon our republic. How often are we really grateful for the blessings bestowed on us and our nation? How often do we think about it? How often do we tell God, thank you for clean water to drink, roads that are pretty well maintained across the nation, depending on what part you live in? The abundance of natural resources that we have in America as a nation. The fact that we have the ability to read our Bible still each day. although many of us don't. There's just so many things you could go down the list. And sadly, we've taken a lot of the blessings. I'm thinking of education right now, and we've really ripped them apart because we've taken God out of it. And that, I was trying to think of an analogy real quick. Somebody gives you a gift and then you completely ignore and pretend that they didn't give you that gift, like you just did it on your own. It doesn't work very well. This is Andrew Jackson's second inaugural address, Monday, March 4th, 1833. I think this is the end of it. Finally, it is my most fervent prayer to that almighty being before whom I now stand, and who has kept us in his hands from the infancy of our republic to the present day, that he will so overrule all my intentions and actions and inspire the hearts of my fellow citizens, that we may be preserved from dangers of all kinds and continue forever a united and happy people. How often do we wish that God would override all of our intentions to the point that we did the right thing, the best thing, even more than what we really wanted to do, if that was the wrong thing? How many of us can say that we ask for God to overrule our own will so much that we're so willing to put our will under his, that he guides us in doing the right thing instead of what we want to do, if what we want to do is not the right thing? That reminds you of Lincoln's quote, right, from the Civil War, when he was asked if he prayed for the Lord to be on our side. He said, no, my constant anxiety and worry is to be on the Lord's side, because I know that he is always on the side of right. And do we have, none of these men that I've read parts of their inaugural address today were perfect, not a single one of them. The interesting thing is, most of them, if not all of them, would tell you that. And they would mean it based on the writings that they left behind. I wonder how many men we have today who are really like that, who are in positions of authority. And I wonder how many of them openly would ask God to help submit their will to God's will. We don't like the word submission today. You can get into whole discussions about that with men and women in marriage, and that'll get a room fired up pretty quickly. Especially sadly, a room that's mostly Christians who are supposed to read the Bible and follow it. But we don't like that word very much, submission. And yet how much better off would our nation be if we had leaders that did what Andrew Jackson was talking about here, and prayed that God would overrule all his intentions and actions so that we could be preserved from dangers of all kinds. God bless y'all. God bless your families. God bless your marriages. God bless America. We'll talk to y'all again real soon, folks. Looking forward to it.